Are your people working hard but not reaching their full potential? The problem is not effort, it is development. At the Modern Observer Group, we transform workforce development into real performance. Our human-centered achievement programs help your team think better, communicate stronger, and execute at a higher level. That means higher employee engagement, stronger leadership, and measurable results across your organization. If you want a workforce that performs, leads, and delivers, it is time to invest in your people. Visit modernobserver.com and discover how the Modern Observer Group helps you build a workforce that wins.
Hello, and welcome to the Success Showcase, the podcast that helps you succeed in your business life and career. I'm your host, Eric Lopkin with the Modern Observer Group, and with me, as always, is Chip Janiszewski from the Happiness and Success GPS. Chip, how you doing this week?
I'm doing great. How about you, Eric?
Doing fantastic. You know, it is sort of strange around here in the Northeast. A few days ago, it was in the 40s. Now it's in the 90s.
Go from the heater to the air conditioner.
That's it. We went from winter to summer with very little sign of spring this year.
Yep, it's just been an interesting year, but everything is going crazy outside now, and unfortunately, the pollen counts are up a little bit, so that's not too cool. But hey, it looks wonderful. I love this time of year.
Yes, everything is green, everything is sprouting. You know, even though we did not have traditional spring weather, you've got that spring feel in the air where everything is renewed. And of course, now it's in the 90s. So it's like, wow, summer's here.
Yep.
Of course, next week it'll probably be in the 40s and 50s again. So,
Yep.
you know, it's...
But unfortunately, after this podcast is over, I have to go out into the jungle known as my lawn and cut it. So there we go.
Oh, we've had to do that for a few weeks already. So,
yep. It's been a couple of weeks.
So today's topic, we're going to talk about communications, in particular, the importance of clarity. Because the fact of the matter is, no two people communicate in exactly the same way. When somebody says something to you, or you say something to them, how you interpret it is a matter of your education, your background, your experiences. So you may have very different feelings about a statement than the person intended. As a consultant, I've actually been in meetings with clients where I have seen two people from the company arguing over something, and I've had to stop them and say, do you guys realize that you're saying the exact same thing in different ways? And it's always been common, but it seems to be becoming more common as people get more argumentative and more defensive. So today we're going to talk about how to increase your clarity and dial down the defensiveness to allow real communications to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's, again, everybody is different, but the more clear you can be, which to me means just simplify things up front, be direct, use simple language, provide details and so on. I mean, you may even want to have, if you're at work and so on and so forth, a list of different pointers that you can go over point by point to just explain things. But again, just like anything else, the more you're prepared up front to do this, the better off you're going to be. And what are the benefits? Obviously, it enhances the understanding of things, eliminates ambiguity. It increases the trust in each other, especially if you have to talk something through, improve collaboration with your team and conflict reduction. So if you are prepared up front to communicate properly, that's so important to do so. But obviously, it starts with really trusting the people that you're working with and so on and so forth. So, I mean, you really have to work on the development side of things as far as relationships to make the clarity work too. At least that's the way that I look at it.
Yes, you do have to build that trust, but you also need to get out of your fear zone. How many times have you seen this happen? You're in a meeting, you've got an important project coming up, the boss is giving instructions. He asks if there are any questions. Nobody has any questions. The meeting breaks up, the boss goes away, and suddenly you realize that nobody has any idea how to move forward. Because they were afraid to ask questions, nobody wanted to be the one to admit that they didn't understand what's going on. That's actually the first part of all of this. If you're told something and you don't understand what you were just told, admit it. There is nothing wrong with asking for clarification. If you don't want to sound stupid, simply phrase it as, I want to make sure we're getting off on the right foot and we've got the right tasks at hand. So and repeat what you think you just heard and say, do I have this right? You're asking for clarity. There's nothing wrong with that. But most people are afraid to look stupid. Well, the fact of the matter is, which makes you look stupider? Asking for clarification or not asking, assuming you understood and getting it wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we use the term all the time. He who assumes makes a, you know what, sells. And what you also have to assume is that your boss knows what he's doing or she is doing. And one of the things that got them there in the first place is their ability to communicate with people. So the fact that you ask them for clarity and so on, hopefully that goes over well with them. And if it doesn't, obviously that one's off for you now, but it's on them. But obviously, if you want to make things work out properly, you have to be able to do that. It's common sense. But everybody does have that fear factor, the inferiority complex, and so on and so forth, just assuming that they should know what the other person's saying. And that doesn't work all the time because we are all different. And even though we may be on the same wavelength 95% of the time, it's that 5% that's going to get you if you don't ask the question for clarification.
Exactly. And flipping that around, if you're the one giving the instructions, when somebody asks you why, don't take this as a challenge. This is actually something that I had back in the days when I was in corporate. My boss would give us assignments, and she was not a good communicator. So in order to provide her with the results she actually wanted, I would ask, well, why are we doing this? What's the purpose? I wasn't trying to challenge her. I was trying to make sure I could deliver the results she actually wanted. She generally took this as a challenge, though. And this was a complete breakdown in our communications. When people ask questions, don't assume, again, there's that assume word, don't assume that they're challenging your authority. If you have to make an assumption, make the assumption that they are trying to do the best job they can and need more clarity or need more information to do that. As you've noticed, these first two things, they're about getting past your own emotional response. whether it's the fear response of looking stupid or the defensive response of somebody challenging your authority. These are emotional responses that very often are incorrect, and they don't come from the situation, they come from your own insecurities. And so you're letting your insecurities screw up the communication, which causes more trouble down the line. So when you're communicating, just focus on what is actually being said. And don't be afraid to repeat yourself. If you have to, you say, let's go over this again from the top to make sure everybody knows what they're doing it. And also be as specific as possible. I've been using this example of a project meeting. Well, if you're in a meeting, and it doesn't have to be a business meeting, you could be meeting with a friend, making plans for the weekend. No meeting should ever end without everybody being aware of what their next step is. If you're making plans, if you've made the if you've agreed on plans, make sure everybody knows what time you're meeting, where you're meeting, what you're going to do from the time you meet. If it's a business meeting, everybody needs to know what their part of the project is. What's their responsibility? But when you're in a conversation, whether it's a formal meeting, a casual conversation, if you're making a plan to get something done, that conversation shouldn't end until everybody knows exactly what their next step is.
Yep. And doing my research for today, I came up with practical communication principles. You talked about the person, the boss who's communicating or whoever's giving the message. And these are a few concepts to help ensure the clarity. And the first one, I really like this one. It's the so that test. When drafting a message, read it aloud and add the phrase so that. If you cannot finish that sentence easily, your message is missing some purpose or context, and it's bound to cause confusion. The number 2 or the 3 C's aim to be clear, concise, and consistent. And we've talked about this in various instances in our podcast before. And then number 3 is tailoring it to your audience. Adjust the level of detail and context and tone to suit who you're speaking to. For instance, if a senior leader just needs a brief summary, keep it brief, but what direct reports might need more details. And if you're going to give more details, those of you who are listening to this should be asking more about the details if you have a question on that. So, I mean, obviously, preparation by the person who is in charge of the project or whatever that we're talking about is really, really important. I really love that so that test. So if you can finish that concisely, chances are the people you're talking to are going to understand it a whole lot better.
Yes, that so that test is there for you to articulate the reason that you are doing this. The answer, because I said so, is never a good reason once you're out of the situation of being a parent of a 10-year-old or younger kid.
Mom, Dad, sorry about that.
Right. It's like, when you're saying it to a little kid, all right, we'll give you a pass on that because sometimes that is the easiest answer. But when you're talking to adults, because I said so is not a reason. The reason is the result. What is it you're trying to accomplish? You're giving a direction so that this will happen. The more detail you give people, the easier time they'll have completing a project. Now, this is all a balancing act. There is such a thing as too much detail. And that's where you have to tailor your message to your audience, as Chip just said. You know, when I talk about our human-centered achievement programs, the platform is built on scientific principles. What I say about those scientific principles is very different if I'm speaking to a group of students than it is if I'm speaking to people that actually have a science background. Somebody who's never heard anything about quantum physics other than the name, I have to be very simple for them. I have to break it down into simple terms. If I'm talking to somebody who's experienced, I can just give the name of the principle and they can take it from there. But you have to tailor what you're saying to the people you're talking to. And understand, if you're talking to a group, whether it's a speech, whether it's a meeting, whether it's even just two other people, not everybody in that group is going to be at the same place. So you may have to repeat things in different ways to make sure everybody understands it.
Yeah, the more clear you can be as far as exactly what the results that you're looking for are going to be, again, so that test, the better off you're going to be. I mean, the more clear you are about that, and simple, just this is why we're doing this, and this is the expected result. If you can get it down to that after your so that statement, that's what people are looking for, and that's a great leadership quality.
Yes. Now, another powerful tool is analogy. Use analogies to take what you're saying and explain it better to a general audience. When I have to explain what my company does, at its heart, it can be very complicated. So I use analogies of things that everybody has an idea about. At a recent event, when I was telling what my company did, I said, think of us as a construction company, but we don't build buildings. We build people, we build businesses, we build teams, and we build nonprofits. After the meeting, somebody that I had never met before that day came over to me and said, that was great. I had no idea what you did, but when you talked about it in terms of construction, it made it so clear. Use an example that's commonplace. In this case, I used a construction company. You can use, a travel agent to help you get where you want to go. Whatever it is, find examples that everybody can relate to and show how what you do is similar to that example. Now, of course, it's not going to be exact, but once they get the basic idea, then they understand enough to ask clarifying questions. Once they know that, if they're interested, they can ask the questions to get more information. But if you don't get that clarifying idea across, they're not even going to know enough to be interested, never mind to ask better questions. So use analogies to help simplify what it is you're talking about.
Yeah, and I mean, if you do that and you have a diversified audience out there, something is going to touch somebody to make it clear to them. Because again, everybody thinks differently, but analogies are also entertaining. I have a financial planner that I know who's really, really cool. And what he talks about, and he likes to sail and wear a cap to the sailor's cap to networking meetings and so on and so forth. And basically, he's the captain of your ship taking you wherever you want to go financially. And it's a great, great analogy when he does his presentation, his 5 minute or whatever. That's what he does. And it's very, very easy to talk about. And yeah, you can have the charts up in front of you and say, okay, some people like the mixtures as far as this goes, as far as risk and stocks and this, but what this is all about It's not about what that is. It's about captaining you. And this is what you're doing at business too. All you're doing is guiding your team to where you want to get them. So that's a wonderful analogy also. But that one's been very, very catchy. And the more you can work on that and try it out with other people. I mean, try it out with your colleagues and so on and so forth. If you're going to do a presentation, test it out on somebody else and see what they think about it. Get other people's input. Don't go alone.
Absolutely. Again, the more you need to communicate, the more you should really be practicing it. You want to talk in front of a mirror, talk to other people, get feedback. Because what you hear in your head is not what other people hear. Again, you know the message you're trying to get across. So to you, it's perfectly clear. This is actually called the curse of knowledge. When you understand something, it's very difficult for you to understand that somebody else doesn't. But you have to assume that not everybody has your particular experience. And that's where the analogies come in. You're picking something that reaches a broader audience than just your experience. Something else you can do that works very well to get ideas across are pop culture references, movie quotes, popular songs. If there's something that epitomizes what you're trying to say, very often there's a quote that many people will know. They may not know where they know it from, but they'll know the quote, and that will give them the idea. And in fact, we had this just before we started recording. As we were going over communications, the first thing that came to Chip's mind was, what we have here is a failure to communicate. Now, we had to look up which movie it came from, but we both knew the quote, and it fit perfectly what the conversation was.
No, and for those of you who haven't seen Cool Hand Luke, you got to see that part of it, because it is the boss there that is really, really tough, and he's got the weirdest voice and so on. It's very easy to not understand him and to not like him, but he doesn't say what we have here is a failure to communication. What we have here is a failure to communicate. A failure to communicate. And he said that about 3 or 4 times in front of all the prisoners and all that other kind of stuff, because this is where it was at a prison. And it's just pop culture references. I mean, obviously they help get the point across, but they're fun. I mean, basically, we had a couple of laughs and started this podcast late because we had to get that thing clarified.
See, what you're trying to do is tailor your message so that it's understandable by the greatest number of people. And what we've talked about so far are simple ways that you can borrow something, an analogy, a quote, to help get your message across better. There's also a matter of making sure that you're talking to people and not at them. And this is something that happens all the time, especially in business. You don't actually have conversations. You're hearing what the person says, but your mind is not focused on it. You're thinking about what you're going to say next. And that's a fantastic way to miss the point of what they're saying. And especially if it's not face-to-face. If you're sending an email, a text, and you're being sarcastic, that tone doesn't come across in text. So immediately, you're adding another way to be misunderstood because you're not adapting your message to the medium. So when you're talking to somebody face-to-face, pay attention to what they're saying. When you're talking on the phone, Same thing, except you should really be paying closer attention because you don't have facial expressions unless you're on a video call. All you've got is the voice to go by. And as you go down communication lines, email, text, you have fewer and fewer clues as to what's actually being said. So clarity becomes more and more important. So pay attention. I know so many people get into the habit, they're on the phone, and while they're on the phone, they're checking email or they're writing themselves a note about something. And when you're doing that, you're not paying attention to what's being said. So you're giving yet another chance for uncertainty to creep in because you don't know what you missed in the conversation.
Yep. I mean, it's just as important to the listener as is to the presenter, for sure.
Yeah, it really is. And that's the other thing is that a presentation, a conversation, however it is that a message is being delivered, is a two-way street. Yes, the person communicating the message has to be clear. The person receiving the message has to make sure they're actually paying attention, actually understands. And as we said at the beginning, can't be afraid to ask questions. And the point of asking a question, again, is simply clarification. If you want more, if you need more information about something, it's a great reason to ask a question. Maybe you have a different experience that's changing your perspective. You can ask about that or share that perspective so that the person that is giving you the message knows, wait a minute, they're coming from a completely different place than I am. We've got to make sure this is clear, and you have to work together. There are approximately 17 different communication styles. Everybody tends to fall into one of the 17 with bits and pieces of some of the other styles. And when you've got two people that communicate in vastly different styles, that's when miscommunication happens, because they're saying something the way they expect to hear it, not the way the audience does. And the audience is expecting to hear it in their communication style, not necessarily the presenters. So there's loads of possible ways for miscommunication to happen. In the worst case scenario, miscommunication causes disagreements, arguments, hurt feelings, all because somebody didn't say, wait a minute, I'm not sure I understood you correctly. This can all be taken care of by not being afraid to ask the clarifying question. And sometimes that clarifying question is, I'm not sure I got that. Could you repeat that? I want to make sure I understand. So we are coming up on the end of our time. Chip, what do you think is the big takeaway for today?
Well, I mean, it's kind of like a tennis court here. We have a sender and we have a receiver, and the ball's kind of going back and forth. If you were the person who was in charge or trying to get the message across, it's so important to create a simple, direct message. I love that "so that" test as far as so that the result is very clear. It's very important to do that. Bring it across in an entertaining fashion if you can, but it's just so important to keep it simple and succinct. Obviously, if you're on the receiving end, paying attention is the most important thing. And what you have to be able to do, if you're listening and you're confused, just ask. You have to ask. And if you can't get the answer that way, then whoever's trying to communicate it to you has got to do something about it, or it's going to be back on them. So it's like a circle as far as going back and forth. But the most important thing is just to communicate, respect each other, throw out the fear thing, and just let it flow as far as the conversation goes. And chances are things will turn out just fine. Good luck.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, something that's important to remember is as a kid, we all played the telephone game. And of course, the message that started out the line is never the message that ended up with the final person. Keep that in mind. Even a slight misunderstanding tends to grow over time. So nip it in the bud. Ask the questions early. Take responsibility, whether you're the listener or the speaker. Take responsibility for making sure everything is clear. Because if both parties take responsibility, you've eliminated most of the problems. You've been listening to the Success Showcase. You can catch every episode at xvadio.com, the Apple Podcast app, YouTube, Rumble, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts. And remember, don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast at your favorite platform. Let's make this your best week ever and make next week even better. We'll see you then.